Canada is a country with collective rights that support the belief of minorities and different groups living in peace. Francophones in minority settings have been protected through legislation and recognized as crucial, yet is that all that meets the eye? Young Francophones may be struggling to keep their culture and identity when placed in an area where they're not the majority. Through the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, it is stated in Section 23 that English-speaking or French-speaking minorities are entitled to publicly funded schools. But how far does the Charter go in providing Francophones education?
Mes parents tiennent beaucoup à cœur le français, c'est pour ça qu'ils nous ont mis à l'école française au territoire. C'est genre la seule école dans la ville. Alors mes parents voulaient vraiment pas qu'on perde cette langue qu'on tient beaucoup à cœur. Le fait de vivre.
Through the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, it is stated in Section 23 that English-speaking or French-speaking minorities are entitled to publicly funded schools. But how far does the Charter go in providing Francophones education? Rachel St. Laurent, a grade 10 student at École Heritage School, once said,
I sometimes worry about losing my French. It takes effort to speak French in everyday life because in Alberta, almost everyone speaks English.
While Rachel attends a Francophone school, she finds it difficult to continue with her culture and heritage. When Alberta was still a part of the Northwest Territories, the Northwest Territories Ordinance No. 22 was passed in 1875, which required schools to teach kids through English. This act was then amended in 1877, allowing French to be the language of instruction. Another act that threatened Francophone culture was the Manitoba Schools Act in 1890. This act cut off public funding for Catholic schools in Francophone minorities and made English the only language in the province. What does our history show about our perspective towards Francophone minorities in the past and present? Canada has come a long way from what the country was 100 or so years ago. Francophones are no longer seen as unwanted and are recognized as important in preserving Canada's history and culture. 12 Francophone school boards were created in Ontario in 1997, allowing more Francophones to become educated on their culture. But is education enough for preserving the Francophone culture? There are no areas entitled to them where they can converse, and some Francophones even feel as if they're being singled out and assimilated. Claudette Roy quotes,
It's one thing to have a right, and it's another to access that right. A right that makes a difference in your life only when you use it. Nothing happens automatically from you reaching a right in the Charter. For Francophone students to become contributing members of our country and the world, they need to learn their first language and in an environment that supports their identity. They need to learn from other Francophones and hear the stories, learn the stories, not just so they can retell the stories, but also they can create with them and find new ways of being Francophone. People in the majority don't have to think about what supports their identity. The supports are just there, but they aren't just there for us. The fact of the right and using the right makes me proud as a citizen. I'm living in a country that allows me to say, I'm legitimate, I have the right to be here. I really feel good about that, for myself, my family, my country, and for Canada.
Minority settings do not provide a supporting environment for Francophone identities. In the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, in Sections 16 to 20, English and French are identified as the official languages of Canada. This section created a large impact for Francophones. While minority Francophones are far from living in a setting that promotes their individuality, the rights they are given enables them to have a grasp on more of their culture. It is possible for Francophones to become a large part of their French society and contribute to the culture, but it is a tiresome journey to get there. Rights given to Francophones through the Charter do not enable them to keep their culture forever without struggle, but instead give them a choice by exposing them to the culture and giving them an option on whether or not to continue with it. Canada's majority is people who speak English. So when the charter entitled Francophones to their own schools, many felt that that was distinct for their culture and were upset when Anglophone minorities in Quebec were given the same privilege. Canada as a whole is mainly Anglophone, so Francophones felt angered that this one individual right was being given freely to people whose culture wasn't in threat. This brings out another problem. Francophones feel as if they're slowly being assimilated, and that if they don't pay enough attention, their culture may be gone. It's one thing to learn about your culture through school and an entirely different thing to experience it firsthand. For many Francophones, keeping their culture is a challenge in minority settings. In everyday life, they must speak English because of the Anglophone majority, and finding someone who shares the same culture is even harder. Federal and provincial governments have already established schools and institutes for Francophones. Creating an environment in which Francophone minorities can flourish will make Canada stronger. The collective rights towards Francophones and First Nations make Canada a distinct nation that allows different groups, including ones in minority settings, to enhance their culture and not only give the next generation of their culture stories, but allow that generation to create stories.